Are you ready to navigate the new way to work? Forbes Books presents Dare to Care in the Workplace with Kathleen Quinn Botaw. Here's Kathleen.
My guest this week is Marcus Buckingham, the world's authority on what the most effective leaders and highest performing people do differently. He is the New York Times best-selling author of two of the most popular business books of all time. Marcus is currently the head of research, people, and performance at the ADP Research Institute and is widely considered the world's leading expert on talent at work. Marcus, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Kathleen.
So exciting to have you here today. And you and I actually spent some time with you, but you didn't know it. You and I attended the Vistage International session. You performed for us in March of 2021. So it was a wonderful conversation. So I've been a fan prior, and then that just kind of sealed the deal for me. So I'm so excited to talk about the work you've done at Gallup and through your own career and what you're doing. But tell us about your journey. You've had such a remarkable career. How did you get here?
Well, I kind of grew up in a household of HR professionals, which sounds like the funniest thing. My grandfather, after he was a bombardier in the Second World War, and after the Second World War, he went to the London School of Economics. I guess they demobilized him and a whole bunch of, millions of other soldiers, and he went into personnel, worked for British Airways for the entire career, really, in the world of personnel, as it was called then. And then my dad, similarly, he went into personnel. Actually, ended up working for Allied Breweries, of all things.
Wow.
7,000 pubs. One of the challenges you've not often wondered about this, but one of the challenges when you run 7,000 pubs is how do you find really, really good pub managers? Because the beer isn't really that different from the beer in the pub down the road. Mm-hmm. The pub is very much a public house versus just a bar, which I guess is the word where pub comes from. Mm-hmm. And he found a psychometric research firm in Lincoln, Nebraska, of all places. And he brought them over and said, can you help me build an instrument, a pre-employment selection instrument to find more pub managers like the best pub managers? This company was run by a chap called Don Clifton, who I met around the dinner table when I was, I think, 15 in 1982, 83. And before I went up to university, Don said, do you want to come over to Lincoln, Nebraska and learn how to build psychometric instruments that measure people's strengths? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. That sounds rather fun. So I studied social psychology at university, which is all really about kind of what's wrong with people. And then in my summers, I went over to Lincoln, Nebraska and studied at the feet of Don Clifton, who is the grandfather, if you like, of positive psychology, where we studied everything that was right with people and how do you measure what was right with people. And then after university, I went and joined Gallup and we spent the first 17 years of my career at Gallup measuring engagement, measuring human strengths.
That is brilliant. That is wonderful. And, it really is, people are brilliant. They're wonderful people. So looking at people from their positive side, what they can do versus what they cannot do is really where the magic happens, in my opinion. So when you think about where we are today, right now, the Great Resignation is happening all around us. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, you're right. I mean, each human being is so incredibly unique, regardless of race or gender or nationality or religion. If you actually count the number of synaptic connections in your brain, you have more synaptic connections than there are stars in 5,000 Milky Ways. That's the extent of how weird you are. I mean, sorry, how weird you are.
I am weird. That was a perfect comment. I'm very weird. Thank you.
But I'm weird too. Like I have an elder brother and a younger sister, both of whom are really good at the arts, really good pianists. And my sister was a professional ballet dancer for 20 years. I have no musical talent in me at all. And yet I'm raised in the same family with the same gene pool. And everyone is like that. Every single one of us is unimaginably unique in terms of what we love, what we pick up on, what we pay attention to, what makes us impatient, what makes us joyful. And unfortunately, we live in a world where that uniqueness is seen, particularly at work, but you could actually play this back into school, is seen as an impediment for us delivering at work consistent, uniform outcomes from various jobs. We seem to think that people's uniqueness at work is actually an obstacle to us delivering quality, consistent service. And so we design jobs. I know we don't say this, we never say it this way, but we design jobs in order to grind the uniqueness out of you. And so when you think about where we are today, the pandemic didn't create this problem.
No.
But it turned up the volume on this problem to go, your work doesn't reflect you. Your work doesn't see you. I mean, gosh, we have one nurse supervisor to 50 nurses. I mean, that's the way that most healthcare institutions are set up, 1 to 50, 1 to 60. Those nurses, those 50 nurses aren't seen. How can one supervisor really see the uniqueness, understand, or pay attention to the uniqueness of 50? You can't. And we wonder why the burnout levels of nurses are as high as they were before the pandemic. So we've built, Kathleen, a world of work that really, if you peel the onion, we've built a world of work that simply doesn't work for us as unique humans. And then we've just told people, hey, look, suck it up, put in your hours, make your money, go home and do your stuff. They come back to work, and we will basically just try and force you to be homogenous at work. And it's not good for us as humans. A lot of work, anyway, is not good for us as humans.
No, it isn't. I completely agree with you. And to your point, most employers try to exhaust their employees and have them follow a set of guidelines and rules that kills the innovation in the very humans that we're trying to inspire and to serve our customers. So when people hire an employee, they really expect someone who can innovate within their company, yet they kill it. No matter what, they want them to follow their rules and not innovate. What do you think about, companies that are struggling with that innovation right now and struggling with change?
Well, weirdly, it all comes back to the word love. And I don't mean just love your fellow person, although I do mean that as well. I mean, we don't take people's love seriously. What you love about your job, the particular things that you lean into, when do you vanish inside your work and time just flies by? We don't take that seriously at all. We design jobs as though they're loveless. And then we're surprised where people don't find any love in them. I mean, the very first job category that I studied in depth when I first left university was housekeepers, hotel housekeepers at Walt Disney World. And you think to yourself, well, the cliche about the housekeeping role would be A, what a terrible job, and B, that if you were in it, it would be very easy to do well. And yet you study the best housekeepers. We did housekeeping focus groups with, the initial one was the 8 best housekeepers at Walt Disney World. And you listen to that, they didn't know each other, but they were the 8 best out like 3,000 housekeepers. And to hear them talk about their job, to hear them talk about the variety of every single room, the variety of every single guest, of how they vacuumed themselves out of the room and the joy they got from that, or lying on the bed and turning on the ceiling fan as the last thing they did because that was the first thing the guests would do after a long day in the theme parks, or even taking the little fluffy toys the kids leave on the bed and arrange them every day in a different little scene. So Goofy's got his arm around Mickey, and one's got his arm on the remote control, one's got his arm in an empty French fry container. And you hear that and you're like, wow, that's just not the way that the job description looks on the job description board. But you've just defined a job that's like really weirdly fascinating for you. And yet every single thing that I just mentioned was actually prohibited by the job description. You are not allowed to lie on the bed. You are not allowed to touch any more positions to clean the room. So it's like we've designed jobs as though they're hateful. And then we hire people, shove them in the jobs, and then particularly now, insert surveillance methodologies, surveillance technologies to make sure that these people doing these hateful jobs don't goof off. And then we wonder why people burn up. We wonder why people have decided, to the millions of us, have decided that perhaps work isn't actually doing it for me anymore. We've misunderstood that if you really think about what people love to do, the moments and situations and activities that different people love, you could find a way to have work be an incredible source of raw material to help someone figure out that which they love. And that wouldn't mean that they would clean, in the case of housekeepers, fewer rooms or clean them worse. to your point, it would mean that they would come up with more creative, more collaborative, more innovative ways to do something that would really make guests happy. Now, I'm not suggesting that there aren't some, I don't know, rules and regulations a housekeeper should follow to clean a room. There's probably some minimum sort of ticket to the ballpark sort of stuff. But over and above that, all of the creativity you're talking about, all of the innovation and collaboration you're talking about has to come from within the person, which means we ought to start from believing, deeply believing that each one of us, each human, has got so many unique and distinct combinations of loves and loathes. And if we take that seriously from the get-go, we start having an entirely different set of experiences for the people at work than we do now.
And what you're referring to is really pure joy. Having pure joy in what you do every day, because people tend to do what they want to do and what they love to do first. And if they don't want to do it, they're just probably never going to do it or deprioritize it. So if employers could focus more on identifying where people get their joy and putting them in work environments where they can get great joy, they will thrive and the employee experience will increase and therefore the customer experience will increase. So
absolutely, Kathleen.
And the employee experience, we've always talked about employee engagement, right? That was the big word and language for a long time. But employee engagement is really about how I as an employee is engaged in you, the employer. I really believe that it's now about the employee experience. Can you shed some light on that and your perspective on that?
Yes. The situation we have right now is we got 4.5% unemployment. So you've got an awful lot of the power, despite all the crazy, trauma and challenge and difficulty of the pandemic. An awful lot of the power has now swung to the employee over and above the employer. And you've got more job openings than you actually have people to fill them. And you could say that we should be like this anyway, because morally it's just the right thing to do. But even if you put aside the morals for a minute and you just go pragmatically, where are we at? Pragmatically, we're at the point where if you as a company want to deserve really good people, you've got to think articulately about the employee experience. Because the employee experience is one which the employee is going to make a decision whether they stay with you or not, based on their experience. So what experience are you creating for them? Beginning, by the way, with the recruitment process. How awful are most of our recruitment processes? Where just awful, right? Every single opportunity that you could have to even tell people who didn't get the job why they didn't. Every single one of those people advocates for your talent brand or doesn't. And yet the experience that we have created for people onboarding is so mechanistic and dehumanizing. How about onboarding? Most onboarding, I mean, let's face it,
That sounds like a medical procedure.
Onboarding.
Yes, it sounds awful.
It doesn't it? And it's all now, some part of it should be practical. Like, do I have my
practical but not clinical?
Right. But some part of it should be relational. We know that the best way, I mean, it's kind of amazing to me that the earliest human art we've ever found was on a little island called Sulawesi. It was found in 2017, 2018. It's a picture of a group of people. It's 45,000 years old. They thought it was like 10,000 years. 45,000 years old. And it's a picture of a few humanoid figures that are clearly chasing animals, probably to hunt them or to capture them. And every one of these figures has an animal head to denote a particular characteristic or strength that each one of those humans had. So there's a trunk of an elephant, as though that person's very strong. Another one has the face of a lion, like they're very brave. There's the one with the snout of a crocodile, like they're super wily and intelligent or whatever. And you can see that the earliest human art we've ever found, Kathleen, is a picture of a team. Humans work in teams. I right now run the ADP Research Institute. We did this global study, 27,000 people, 27 countries. 85% of people do most of their work on teams. Well, what's a team? I know we normally talk about teams as though you are not as important as the team, as in, there's no I in team. But that's not what teams were built for. Teams were built explicitly to take advantage of the fact that each one of us is different. And that teams, therefore, is a place where we make homes for the weirdness that one person's got the strength of a lion and the other one's got the intelligence of a crocodile and the other one's got the strength of an elephant. You put them all together and you can get a heck of a lot more done together than you could alone. Well, that's called a team. Weirdly, the employee experience, so important today if you want to keep good people, has always got to be mediated through an intelligent building of teams. And yet, I know it sort of sounds like a cliche, teamwork's jolly important. No. I'm not talking about teamwork and rah-rahness. I'm like, what are the teams that we have at work? Humans thrive only on teams. But if you look at many, many workplaces, there aren't any teams. You can't see them. Hospitals aren't built around teams. Schools aren't built around teams. Most manufacturing and distribution centers not built around teams. We've got a whole slew of different industries and sectors where the human capital management systems, you can't even see the teams. So we've got a challenge on our hands in that, as employers anyway, the employee now has a lot more of the power. The employee wants a authentic and human experience at work. And yet really for the last few decades, we employers have not built one. We've got our work cut out. There's no question.
I totally agree with you. In my new book, Dare to Care in the Workplace, I talk a lot about that empathetic leadership and how are we going to train people who lead our people who lead teams, to your point, to lead with empathy. How are we going to train them?
Well, I think you begin pragmatically, don't you? If you don't lead that way, you will lose people. So in a world of very tight labor markets, it's very difficult to just sit down someone and like persuade them around to your way of thinking conceptually. In the world of business, it's much easier to go, listen, if you can't find good people, you got a problem. So if your people come to work for you and feel unheard, unseen, which is kind of the definition of empathy, your first year voluntary turnover will go through the roof. Your 90-day voluntary turnover will go through the roof. We have data to support that to the nth degree. So I've always found in business, the fastest way to get anyone to pay attention to you is to play out the negative, countable negative repercussions of managing or leading in a way that doesn't allow a person to be seen. Right now, I was just talking to the CEO of a hospital system last week. They have 700 openings for nurses. 700.
Yes.
And it's like, and I know we're talking a lot about nurses, but obviously that's one of the industries under greatest pressure.
They're very important. Yes, absolutely.
Hugely important. And you go, well, why? Well, probably because you haven't actually taught your leaders what it means to, as you would say, to lead with empathy. And by the way, Kathleen, I think we've just massively overcomplicated what leading is. Leading, from all the research that I've led and been a part of, comes down to, in a weird way, comes down to one ritual, which we came to call a check-in. But you could call it a touch base or a one-on-one. But every week, 15 minutes, you ask me 2 questions about last week and 2 questions about this week. What'd you love about last week? What'd you loathe? What are your priorities this week? How can I help you? That's 15 minutes. And from everything from our data, it doesn't seem to matter whether you're doing it in person or text to text or in app or whatever. What matters is that you're paying frequent light touch attention about the near-term future for that one individual. If you do that, people feel seen. They don't necessarily want a perfect, brilliant, empathetic coaching moment every week. But if you're doing it every week, you and the manager know that there's going to be a release valve every week. You're going to be able to share something about your work experience every week. The manager doesn't have to fix all your problems every week. Sometimes, as you know, with empathy, it's just the sharing. Sharing helps. Awareness helps. So,
and transparency helps too. Transparency builds trust. So the more you model the behavior you want your leaders to have by asking those key questions, they're going to trust that you want the answers so you can really help them.
Yes, and that builds over time, doesn't it? So to start with, when you talk about check-ins, like one of the companies we do a lot of work with is Cisco. They've done 4 million check-ins a year for the last 4 years. So it's doable. It's just initially sometimes managers are like, well, these people aren't going to share anything with me. And so you have to start by going, well, you got to start from where you are. And where you are, is right now, just ask the questions, see whether there's anything you can do to help for this coming week, see whether there's any interference that you can run, anything you can do to help the person get done what they need to get done, any tweak, any little course correction, and then do it again next week and do it again next week. And if you do that, over time, trust builds. We've just overcomplicated leadership, in my view.
Yes, and business leadership is really about building a relationship with people and a community that you can count on that have common values and common beliefs. And when I speak to audiences, and I give them 2 questions, very close to your 4 questions. Ask your people why they work for you and why would they leave? Wouldn't that be great if we knew that about everybody who worked for us? Yes. And I get the similar answer that you get. Well, they're just going to tell me what I want to hear, or they're going to lie to me. Well, if the leaders of our organizations are already decided not to have the courage to ask the question, then we have a bigger crisis than we thought.
Yeah, it's like we still do actually, an awful lot of employee engagement surveys so that we can sort of ongoingly help a team member or team leader know where the mood of the troops is. And it's amazing how frequently the CEO will go, well, I'd love to do that, but I don't want to do it yet. And I'll go, well, why not yet? Well, because people are pretty grumpy right now, so I don't really want to do it until they're not grumpy. And you're like, wait a minute. You start from where you're at.
Yes, it's the perfect time.
Right. It's always, now is always the perfect time to listen. There's never a good time to stop listening. Just listen and move, listen and move, listen and move. Life's iterative.
And little movements mean a lot. They really do. Well, hang on, Marcus. I hate to do this, but we have to stop right here. Coming up in the second part of my conversation with Marcus Buckingham, the world's authority on what the most effective leaders and highest performing people do differently, Marcus discusses the cross-section between HR and culture.
The HR function, I know we sort of think of them sometimes as the HR police or the compliance function, but they're not. It's the culture function. When all of those very human, emotional things are handled well, you have a culture that people will go and spread around the neighborhood. When you don't do it well, you don't.
This has been Dare to Care in the Workplace. To connect with Kathleen, go to KathleenQuinnBotaw.com. Kathleen's book, Dare to Care, is available wherever books are sold. Dare to Care in the Workplace is a production of Forbes Books.